Hello everyone and welcome back to ASP.NET Core 1.0. My name is Steve Bishop, and in this video we're going to talk about controller methods. More specifically, we're going to talk about the controller methods that come with the controller class, which each of your controllers should be inheriting from. Now there are a lot of methods that come with the controller class, and we don't really have time, and it would get pretty boring to go through every single one of these, but we will be talking about the ones that you see highlighted in green. These are the more common methods that you'll find yourself using throughout your development of MVC. Furthermore, I've broken up these methods that are highlighted in green into two separate videos. We're first going to talk about the content-driven methods. That is, there's some sort of response that is going to be returned back to the user that is more immediately available for them to use. In the video after that, we'll talk about redirects. That is the local redirect, a regular redirect, and a redirect to action or to a route. So without further delay, let's go ahead and take a look at the content method. So I've made a few changes here. I've just commented out all of our routing attributes, both on our member home controller and our home controller. And then in the startup class, I went back to using the two routes that we have here for default and members. So I just wanted to show you that so that you guys knew where we were at with the code. Now let's talk about this content method a little bit more closely here. So we were talking about content in a previous video where we were saying that the "Hey there gorgeous" string was just basically being sent to the user as part of the response object. So let's just go up to debug, start without debugging. And I'm doing this without debugging for a reason. There's actually two reasons. Number one is that it's not going to fill up my fiddler here with a bunch of responses back and forth between the browser and the server for debugging. And secondly, we can actually make changes to our classes here without having to recompile, because having it in the non-debugging mode, anytime you make a change to a class, the new ASP.NET Core will actually pick that up and recompile it for you on the fly, so you don't have to restart your connection every single time, which is fantastic. Makes development a lot easier and smoother in some cases. So we see our "Hey there gorgeous" text that we expected from our "Hey there gorgeous" string that we passed in for the content method. And if we look at the source of the page, we'll see that we just simply have a string of "Hey there gorgeous." Now that doesn't at all seem too important, but if we look at the fiddler information, and we look at the raw, I'm just clicking on the raw tab here so we can see the entire object as a response. We see that we get "Hey there gorgeous" as the body, but there's also this content type set to text plain. Okay, so text plain charset UTF-8. This header, this content type header, is actually being set as part of what the content method does to the response object. So the content method is doing more than just setting the string of the body. It's also changing some of the header information that we see here in the actual response object. So it's doing more than just setting this. It's also changing some of the information we see up here in the headers, including this 200 OK. So why is this so super important? Well, if we go here to our content method, and I'm just going to go ahead and copy this string of that has HTML code in it, and I'm going to pass this in as the response that we send back as our content method. So we can see that there's, I think I have too many quotation marks. Let me just paste this correctly here. There we go. So this has HTML code in it. And what I'm doing here is essentially taking our index HTML that's in this under our home section here for our home controller or index action. And I'm just taking this HTML and I've interpreted it as a string, which also means I need to take this content object and recreate it. So I'm just going to uncomment our content object out, or contact object, excuse me, so that we can fill in the data here for our string. Okay, so we're passing back HTML code as the response body on our response object. So That's what we should see, right? Well, if I just go ahead and make those changes and hit refresh on our browser here, we'll see that we get as text all of the HTML. And that's probably not the response we wanted. And we can even see, sure enough, there's our HTML encoded. Everything looks right as far as what we would expect it to be, but our response is just this text that includes the HTML. And if we look at Fiddler more carefully, and again, we need to decode that, there's our HTML code, but the difference is our content type is set to text/plain. Now, when we get into the views and when we're sending back a view response, this is actually going to be different. Actually, let me go ahead and do that for you. I'm going to go back here and I'm just going to change this. I'm going to comment this out and we'll use the view method, which is going to instead pass back our contact object, but it's going to send the index view, right? Let's see what this looks like instead. So it's the same HTML that we're going to see here, but instead we have, it's kind of nicely formatted there, but still HTML is HTML. Why is it that this is showing up properly, whereas with the content, well, if it showed the full text. If we look here, we'll see the content type is text HTML. So rather than text plain, we saw text HTML for our view. That's because the view method sets that header on our object to text HTML, and that tells the browser then to interpret this text that we see here as HTML code. But when we did it as the content method, it actually saw it as string. Here in Fiddler, it just saw it as plain text, so it didn't interpret it as HTML. Okay, so I hope that you guys can see how that all fits together. These methods, the view method, for example, and the content method, they're doing different tasks besides just passing along content. They're also setting those response values for the response headers. Next up, we're going to take a look at the file method. So the file method, I'm just going to go ahead and make a new action here. So we'll do public action result. And this is going to be download data. And this is just going to return the results from a file method. And the file method has 6 different overloads. The first overload you can see here, you can pass in as the first parameter an array of bytes. Okay, so that could just be the contents of a file as an array. And then you'll see that the second parameter is a content type. Now remember, content type is this content type here that is the response object header, right? The content type header on our response object. So when you're passing a file back to the browser as part of your response object, you need to specify what type of file it is so that the browser properly interprets that file content, okay? Now, we're not going to pass in an array. The other option is we could say a virtual path, and a virtual path comes from underneath the root folder in the Contoso and the SRC. So we've got this path here. The SRC is the root of our project, and then Contoso is the name of the project that we're working under. And under www root, that is the root of our web application. And right now there's a single file called web.config. So the path would have to be some sort of path underneath this web root. It is not a path on your computer. Okay, it's somewhere underneath the root of your web application. And once again, we need to send in as a second parameter the content type. Now I'm not going to do this one either. I'm going to show you though that the third overload here is where you can actually pass in, if you create a stream object, an IOStream object, you can pass that in as your first parameter, and then once again, of course, the content type. Then there's 3 more overloads, and basically these 4, 5, and 6 are all the same as the first 3, except they've added this third parameter here of file download name. And this means that you can pass in a parameter as a string of what you want the user to see that they should download this file name as. And that's just something that, you're basically suggesting to the user that that's the name of the file that they should call it. And this is often helpful for if you want to convey something to the user about what that file is for, but it also makes it so that the actual file name is somewhat obscured from the user, so they can't actually see it. So first, before I can make this all happen here, and I'm going to use the overload number 5 where we're passing in a virtual path with the content type, and we're going to specify a download name to the user. But to do this virtual path, I need to go ahead and add my file here to my root. So I'm going to go to root, right click on this, and I'm going to add a new folder. I'm going to call this download data. And under my download data folder, I'm going to add an existing item because this is going to be a text file that I've already created. And we'll call it, it's under test folder, test data, okay? So this first parameter here, which is for overload number 5, is going to be the virtual path. So we're going to do a string of the virtual path, and this is going to be, we'll do /download data /test data.txt. Then the content type is it's just a plain text. So this is just going to be text /plain. Now the download name, I'm going to say toosexy.txt. Okay, so that's obviously a different file name than what I've named it here, called test data. Okay, so let's go ahead and save this, and we're going to want to go to the home controller to the download data action. So we'll do that. We'll do home download data, and we should get prompted to download a file called toosexy.txt. So once again, that is the name that we gave it here as the third parameter of the file method. Okay, so if we open this up, I'm sure you guys are wondering, I'm too sexy for my shirt. I'm too sexy for my shirt. Yeah, it hurts. Okay, so that's obviously a tribute to Red Said Fred. And so now you can see that you can download a file that is a virtual file. It's a file that exists underneath the path on your root directory, okay? Now, just to show you that this is actually much simpler than it may at first appear, you don't have to use Visual Studio to get a file underneath these folders. Because if I show you this, under my Visual Studio projects, this is the location that I'm holding the Contoso application. There's our SRC folder, okay? So here's our SRC folder. And under SRC, we have our Contoso project, okay? So that's Contoso there. And under Contoso, we see our controllers, models, properties, views, and www root. So the folder system that we see here in Visual Studio is identical to what we see here under our project, okay? And there's the www root, there's the download data folder, and there is our test data. So you don't have to go through Visual Studio to add your files like this. You can just dump them right here into the folders underneath your www root, and they will show up here automatically. Visual Studio will pick up that the file has been put in there and automatically put it there for you, okay? So just so that you guys know that that kind of makes things a lot easier if you want to dump a file into your directory structure and you don't want to have to go through Visual Studio to do that. All right, so next I'm going to show you physical file. So we'll change this from file to physical file. Now physical file is a little bit different. So let me just comment this out, or take that out here, delete that. And I'll show you that the IntelliSense says that we actually have to specify a physical file. Okay, so this is really the alternative to the file method by allowing us to specify some other location on our drive that is not a virtual path underneath www root. So we can specify the original location that we found the file, and that is on my C drive here under test folder. We have this test data. So let me just kind of copy some of this here. So the path is a string, and backslashes need to be escaped, so I need to do double backslash there. And the name of our file was testdata.txt. Now, our original file, when we downloaded it here, we can see, if we decode this, But you can see the content disposition, attachment, file name, too sexy text, file name UTF-8, and too sexy.txt. So this content disposition is telling it when we use the file method that the file name was too sexy text and that it was an attachment, okay? So now if I do physical file and we do content type, text plain, so we're doing basically the same thing, but we're specifying the text file on the hard drive of the computer, okay? Now if we reload this, oops, let me try that again. I thought I was gonna get there. Home, download data. Try that again. There we go. Okay, so we're just getting actual text. So physical file is not actually sending it as a file. And if we look at Fiddler, remember when we tried to do the file, when we used the file method, we saw that content disposition had attachment file name, okay? But when we look at this version of it and we decode this, there is no content disposition. Instead, it just says content type. So I don't know if this is on purpose. I think it is. I think this is on purpose so that if you have an HTML file that you just want to display to the user, you can pass it along as a physical file. And if you need to attach something as an attachment, then you're not going to be able to use physical file to do this. You have to use the file method if you want the user to receive it as a downloadable file. Okay, so let's take a look at HTTP bad result, and I'm going to comment out our contact information here. We're going to go back to the index method, and we'll do return, oops, let me go down to the right line here, return HTTP bad request. So bad request, you can see in the IntelliSense, creates a bad request result. Okay, so that's the object, is bad request result. And that produces a bad request 400 response, okay? And there are 3 overloads here. You don't have to pass anything in as a parameter, or you can pass in a model state dictionary, or you can just pass in a regular old object that is the error. Now, I'm not going to show you any of those because really I only find that it's really only useful to do the bad request with no parameters, but you might find a use for passing objects in. I don't know, it's up to you. But if we do HTTP bad request, this should send back a 400 result to the user. So if we do back up here, I'm going to get rid of the home download data and hit enter. We should just get a 400. There you go. So HTTP 400 is not you, it's this link. It appears to be broken. And Edge browser even gives you some nice little things here. It fills up, the Edge browser actually gives you its own HTML. So this is not HTML that's passed by the web application. This is actually Edge browser HTML that's automatically picked whenever a 400 response is given by a server. And it's kind of nice because it just basically tells the user that it's not their fault that they came to a bad link, okay? Perhaps you're doing some sort of construction on the website and you don't want the link to be available for right now until you get it fully functioning, and that's really what the 400 error is for. So it's not you, it's telling the user it's not their fault. It's typically a link that they should be able to go to, but it appears to not be working right now. Now, counter to the 400 error though, instead of HTTP bad request, we could do HTTP not found. And not found is going to give a 404 response. And you can pass in an object as a value, but again, I don't really find much value in doing so. Maybe you'll find some reason to do that, but honestly, HTTP not found is pretty much telling the user you've come to the wrong place. So if we just reload this and see the HTTP 404 error, it's basically telling them, you're not in a good spot. This page is missing, okay? So clearly passing an object doesn't really make much sense in my opinion, but maybe, Microsoft just put that in for a reason, so maybe there is a reason. Now next after not found, which is the 404 error we're all accustomed to, there is the HTTP unauthorized. And the unauthorized is going to give a 401 response. And you can see there's no objects being sent back as a 401 response. So our HTTP unauthorized is going to give the user a different appearance. So let's save that. Oops, didn't mean to do that. And there we go. Refresh this. And we just get a blank screen. There's not even any body to the message. But if we look at Fiddler here, we'll see a 401 response. You can see 401 unauthorized, okay? So there is something basically being sent back to the browser, and different browsers are going to react differently to the responses. In this case, the Edge browser doesn't really know what to do with a 401 response, so it doesn't show anything. But unauthorized is typically going to indicate to the user that, hey, you are not authorized to be in this location. And that's for once you have some sort of login or credentials that allow a user to access specific sections of a website based upon their authentication. And in this case, you may want to check to see if they are logged in. If they haven't logged in, then they're going to get this HTTP unauthorized instead. Okay. Now, don't worry, we will talk about authentication later on in this course, but just for right now, just understand that that's what HTTP unauthorized does, is it just passes that 401 response, basically telling them that they're not allowed in this section of the application just right now.